Determining the network broadcast and usable host range is obviously important when designing an IP scheme. It is important to chart the usable IP ranges as well as plan for future growth, and hopefully these 7 steps will make this a little bit easier. To start with, we have to determine whether we have a class A, B, or C address, and if this address is in CIDR format, convert it to dotted decimal. Next, we create a chart with our subnet mask on the first line and our IP address on the second line. In the left-hand column, we fill in where we'd like to have our subnet address, our broadcast address, and our first and last usable host ranges. Here is our chart with the subnet mask on the top line followed by the IP address below that. Next, we focus our attention on the 255 octets in the subnet mask. Below that is going to be part of the network address, which will not change in this case, so we just simply fill in the blanks below it. We then focus our attention on the 0 octet in the subnet mask. Here we place a 0 in the subnet, and then down in the broadcast address we place a 255 in the last octet. What we're looking for now is the numbers to fill in the third octet. We focus on the subnet address of 240 in the third octet, and we have to find our magic number. To do this, we subtract 240 from 256. This gives us the number 16. 16 in this case is our magic number. What we need to do at this point is to increment 16 starting from 0 until we get to a number that is either equal to 96 but not greater than 96. As you can see, 96 fits this criteria nicely. We simply just take that 96 and fill it into the blank. We now have to determine our broadcast address. Looking at our 96 subnet that we determined from the last step, we notice that our last bit in this range is 111. We simply take that 111 and put it into the third octet of the broadcast address. We now have to determine our first and last valid host ranges. We'll start with the first, obviously. We start with the subnet, third octet 96, and bring it down. Now for the last octet, we add 1, so 0 plus 1 is 1, and we fill in 1 in this space. Now for the last valid host range, we start from the broadcast address and work up. From the 111 in the third octet, we bring that up, and then 255 in the last octet, we subtract 1. In this case, it will be 254, and we fill in the spout here. So what happens if you have a subnet mask that does not have any zeros? We simply look for the magic number. Let me show you 3 examples. I'll do an A, B, and C address example, and I'll show you how this is done.
Okay, for our first example, a Class A address, I know I previously said I was going to use a subnet mask with no zeros in the octets. This first example is going to have zeros, the next 2 examples will not. So since I've worked the problem before previously in the video, let's just go ahead and work this chart out here. Starting with your subnet mask first octet with the 255, as you know, nothing underneath that's going to change, so you just bring down the number and plug it in. Okay, moving to our last 2 octets in the subnet mask of zeros. On the subnet side, just bring down the zeros. And on the broadcast address side, just bring down 255. Okay, now what we have to do is focus on this third octet of 248 in the subnet mask. We have to find our magic number, and to do so, we subtract 248 from 256. And that is going to give us the number 8. Now 8 is going to be our magic number, and what we're looking for is a number, in this case, equal to but not greater than 30 in the third octet of the IP address. So incrementing, starting at 0 using the number 8, we do 0, 8, 16, 24, 32, and I'm going to stop there because 32 is obviously larger than 30. So therefore the octet, third octet of 30 is going to fall into the 24 subnet range somewhere. Therefore 24 is going to be plugged in here is our subnet So this is our subnet address 10.24.0.0. To find the broadcast address, though, we have to figure out what the end range of the 24 subnet is. Now, if this is 32, that obviously means that this ends at 31. Therefore, we plug in the number 31 here, and that gives us our broadcast address of 10.31.255.255. Okay, the last two steps just basically fill in the blanks here. We need to find the first valid host range and the last valid host range. To find the first valid host range, we start with a subnet address and just bring everything down 1. 24 is brought down, 0 is brought down. Now, in the last octet, we have to add 1 to it. So 0 plus 1 is 1. That gives us our first host range is 10.24.0.1. To find the last valid host range, we start from the broadcast address and work up, again plugging in the numbers, just 31 and 255. And again, at the last octet, in this case, we don't add, we subtract 1. So 255 minus 1 is 254. Okay, we have found through our chart here that the 10.30.200.16, it's in subnet 10.24.0.0. The broadcast would be 10.31.255.255, and the usable host range is going to be 10.24.0.1 to 10.31.255.254. Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on to our second example, a Class B address. Okay, for our second example, a Class B address, we have the subnet mask 255, 255, 255, 224, no 0 octets. And if you think about your IP training, you're probably thinking that doesn't look like a Class B subnet address. Well, it's not. It's not the default 255, 255, 0.0. In order to make this a full range of 4 octets minus a 0, I went ahead and gave that a Class C address. So let's go ahead and plug in the numbers here. Again, with 255, anything below that, just bring the numbers down. Again, looking for our magic number here because we have to figure out what our subnet and broadcast range is, and from there we can find our first and last usable host. Again, using 224, we subtract that from 256. 32 is our magic number. Again, we're looking for a number that is equal to but not greater than 36. Incrementing starting at 0 using 32, so we have 0, 32, 64. Might as well stop there because we know that 64 is obviously much larger than 36. So therefore, our octet of 36 must fall into the 32 subnet range. So we plug in 32 as our subnet address. Now, looking for the broadcast address here, we look at the 32 and the next subnet would be 64, so 32 must end at 63. Therefore, 63 is going to be our broadcast address. Okay, the last two steps for the first and last usable host range. Working down from the subnet, you add 1, so it's 32 plus 1, so it would be 33. Then, for the last usable host range, working from the broadcast up, you subtract 1, so 63 minus 1, 62. Therefore, our ranges are from 172, 16, 47, 33, all the way to 62, with the subnet being set 172, 16, 47, 32, and 172, 16, 47, 63 is the broadcast. Okay, let's move over to our final example, a Class C address. Okay, in our final example, a Class C address, again, the subnet mask is 255, 255, 255, 192, no zeros. So in the 255 range, as we know, just go ahead and pull the numbers down and plug them in. looking for our magic number again, we take 192 and we subtract it from 256. Okay, that's going to give us 64. 64 is our magic number. In this case, like before, we're looking for a number that, in this case, is equal to but not greater than 150. So we increment using 64 starting at 0. So 0, 64, 128, 192, and I'll stop at 192 because obviously 192 is much larger than 150. So therefore 150 has got to fall into the 128 subnet range. 128 being the first number, we plug that in as our subnet address. Now the host address, as you probably can guess by now, is going to be one less the next number, 192. So that's going to be 191. So you plug in the 191. Okay, and you should be comfortable by now knowing that to find the first host range, starting at the subnet, you bring down and add 1, so this would be 129. And then for the last usable host range, starting at the broadcast working up, you subtract 1, so this is 190. Therefore, our subnet address is 192.168.75.128. Broadcast is 192.168.75.191. with the usable range of 192.168.75.129 to 190, since the first 3 octets are all the same. In fact, the first 3 octets are the same throughout. And this concludes actually the last example here. If you have any questions, just email them to me at questions@packetbyte.com, and do check us out at packetbyte.com. Thank you.
Thank you.